Welcome back to Reynolds Runabouts, everybody. I'm Jeffrey Reynolds. In this episode, I'm going to show you how I repaired the hull side area under this splash rail that I've been also working on. I had to fix this splash rail in a couple different places. That's in the next episode where I not only fix it, but I show you how I put it back on along with the port side. But this episode will contain information on how to fix a plywood, molded plywood hull, not a true hole, but out of the 5 layers I estimate that this molded plywood hull had, it was down 3 layers in this area were rotted out. And that's largely because of the splash rail was not bedded when it was made in the factory in 1955 and allowed water to get behind it, and over several decades not only rot the splash rail but rot the molded plywood. Both are very hardy when it comes to water, but with time and water and rot it did a lot of damage. So I will show you how I did that. Before I can put the starboard splash rail back on the boat, I have to fix this problem. We have a delamination of the molded plywood, 1, 2, at least 2 layers deep and into the 3rd from what I can tell. And this boat has got some really thick veneers. When I sanded on it and scraped on it, it's amazing how you can go back and sand it with 80 grit smooth and it's still got a lot of depth, and you can even see how deep that exterior plank is, or strake veneer. And then it goes into a diagonal, which then gives you another diagonal, which gives you the strength of a molded plywood hull with glue and heat. This makes it so hard. So what I'm going to do, if this was in if it was in an area where you'd have varnish and stain, I would make a patch, meaning cut out the bad into a square and with an oscillating saw, just cutting it down very slightly, or you could even use a plane to get it to a common level, meaning probably this one. And then you would lay in a patch with epoxy and another piece of veneer. Hopefully you can get something close, because that's the tough part. And it gets very expensive from what I've read. I've never done it. This one is below the water line and it's going to be painted. So this one I'm going to use some fiberglass cloth. I don't want to get it too high, so I'm going to probably do at least 1 and then maybe 2 of this chopped strand. And then I'll go ahead and put some epoxy on that, and then I will go ahead and put this in, and then some thickened epoxy to do some of these grain, really deep grain pieces, to fill in that grain with thickened epoxy, and then I'll put this on, and then we'll go ahead and just lay it on, I think 2 layers, and then I will fix that. We've got this issue here. Some parts of the rail were really gouged out. I found that on something down, I think on that other end of the boat. And I'm not sure that's rot as much as it might have been, they dug it out so it was a more fair surface for the spray oil. I'm not sure. That will also get filled in while I'm here, and make sure that we've got a good flat surface. I'd rather work on the spray rail to get it fit thin on the boat. It makes no sense to dig into the boat. So I'll fill in some of those issues as well, and we have this thing as strong as ever. To make this repair, first I have to prepare the area so that the fiberglass cloth will stick. Now, even though this has got penetrating epoxy on it, and I've sanded it a little bit to kind of take, if there's any sort of blush from that off, I did. I want to still follow the good procedures of always coating this with straight epoxy to guarantee that you've got no dry wood back there that is going to absorb the epoxy out of the epoxy binder filler mix, because that just leaves you with binder, and you don't want that, because it's, you know, it's just like throwing sawdust at it with no glue. You need to have something on here first to give the wood a chance to absorb even more of the straight resin if it needs it. Now, I didn't tape this off like I would if it was in a more noticeable area, because I don't have to worry about having this not get sanded and then covered with paint and primer. I'm just going to just attack it. And I do have the draping cloth over where the varnish and stain is going to go eventually. So I'm going to get up and around up in there. And I dished it out like you would with a fiberglass repair. That's why I'm kind of heading over into this direction. This is that area that I was not sure what happened, but it's certainly something I can fix now that I have the opportunity. Again, it could have been they were gouging it out just to make the rail fit better. Maybe not. Here's a little one I wanted to fix. And this was the only area I remember really being dicey. So I'm using TotalBoat Epoxy. I had been using Smith's before. Just thought I would try TotalBoat to see what it was like. I hadn't tried it before. Very happy with it. Very happy with, not Smith, sorry, the Goujon Brothers Epoxy. I'm having a absence of mind to tell you what that is. But I found those two to be really good. This is a little more, it's a little more inexpensive, and I have not had any issues. I've been kind of keeping an eye on it, so if something went wrong, I had a reason to go back to the Goujon Brothers brand. But for the most part, I have not noticed anything that would make me wonder if this is a good choice in epoxy. I don't use laminating resin as much. I have used it on fiberglass boats because you're building layers. I'm not on this one. It's more of a repair, and I want it to harden up quickly. You don't have to put on with laminating resins, you have to put something on top of it to cure it, like gel coat or a curing cover. Epoxy will cure on its own because it puts out a blush, which creates an anaerobic environment for this epoxy, and then that's what makes it cure. So I'm going to stick with that until maybe I get back on a glass boat where I've got a lot of lamination that I have to do. So I've got this all coated to where I want it. I'm looking for dry spots. Even though this has got 2 coats, there's still some dry spots. This hull will get another coat or even more. I get the fairing compound on, I will sand it, and then I'll put a couple more coats of Smith's penetrating epoxy sealer on that, just in case I took off any sealing quality from the other 2 layers. I'll be putting it back on over the epoxy, which will help, or the fairing compound, which will help it become, more of an envelope. So you get that done, and then I'm going to get some I'm going to get another tub of resin, and I'm going to mix in a filler binder combination that will fill in these divots a little bit that I can't get the cloth into. You want to have something in that crack. So you put the binder filler in there, and then the cloth goes over it, and you have a seamless connection to everybody. So I'm going to do that. So the epoxy that I couldn't remember the name of is West System, which is very common and very trustworthy. I've used it for years. And I happen to have a West System 404 or high density adhesive filler. This is what you use to put over this first coat of clear epoxy, clear resin, meaning unadulterated by this, which is now soaked in, and I can see some areas where I'm going to move it around a little bit even more. to keep that. Again, you don't want it to starve this batch of adhesive and resin and then have your patch fail. So I put in a healthy scoop of this. And what I don't want is peanut butter. Peanut butter is what I want to use when I want to bind something and I don't want it sagging like I did for the keel. I didn't want it sagging, I wanted it peanut butter consistency, sticky. This has a little more runniness to it. Not only will that allow it to fill better, but it also will allow the fiberglass to absorb it and wet out the glass, and I'll show you how that works. So again, what this is for, this is to put some filler and binder into the little cracks and things that fiberglass cloth or mat, whatever you use. I'm going to be using a chopped strand mat because it's thin and it's very workable. You can put it in and get it to fit just about any contour. And that isn't why I'm using this necessarily as much as I'm using it for thinness. You can get different thicknesses of cloth and mat. I just happen to have that, and it's going to be, I think, exactly what I want. So here I'm just filling in all the voids. Some of which I can't even see, but I know that they're there because I know that this wood suffered some cracks and just a deterioration of the wood. So what I want to do is try to give that back with this binder / filler combination. And it's all right to go over your area too much because you'll sand it off anyways. If this was in an area that was going to be varnished and stained, obviously I'd be a little more worried about things showing. But what I want to do now is just make sure all of those little voids are full. So it's much like what came from the factory. It's going to be strong again. And right here is your deep spot. It's going to be obvious where I'm going to need at least 2 layers of cloth. I'm not going to forget that. But now I'm just kind of looking for areas that, now when I put the cloth the cloth on, the mat, it's going to really absorb a lot of this. So I'm going to put it on here quite thick. Now we're ready to put the mat on. When I went and got a big sheet. Not a big sheet, but you want to tear it so you get these hairs. And if you don't have the hairs, you're going to want to make the hairs or ragged. That will give you a better flow into the area, but it'll also give you better sticking. And you just start putting it in. Again, don't get too caught up in the fact that it might be too high. That's going to get buzzed off with your orbital. And just tear and push. The goal is not only to get it stick, but start to get some of that resin to start absorbing into the cloth, the mat. I'm sorry I keep saying that. You see how these overlap? They're ragged, but that's fine because ragged is good. You don't want a defined edge necessarily. There is no defined edge in this damaged area, so you might as well just go at it and fix it the best you can. I'm just going to start working on these little depression areas that I discovered under the rail. The rest of it was pretty good. It was a little shallow, but I think this resin will help build that up. So I'm going to call that good. So I'm going to put that on there, and I'm going to wet it out again with clear resin this time again, because I don't need the binder on top. I need it underneath. So I'm going to get some more clear resin, and I'm going to wet this out and get the air out of it, and then let it sit. if I can discern a valley in this one area, I will go ahead and put on some more of this chopped strand. But sometimes I'll even wait and do it the next time just to see if it filled it. Because sometimes, you know, you just did another repair that you don't even need to do. It turned out to be too high. But I'm going to get some more resin and get this wetted out. I have a new batch of clear resin. Now I want to start adding resin to, you know, a sticky patch. It's obviously not enough, but I want to wet this out, looking to get rid of what look like milky white spots. And that's an area that isn't wet enough. It's a hole, so that's fine, a fastener hole. So that will show you that you have air, like right here. It's not saturated and it has air under it. You want to get both. You want to saturate it so it's dark, get the air out, but you also don't want to put in too much resin, because then you have this problem where the cloth or the mat is floating. That doesn't happen very much with chopped strand because it's so porous that the air usually pops right out if you push on it. And it's really obvious if you have too much resin, you can start to see it drip. And then you know, well, that's too much. So then you just go back and you push it out with a brush, either probably on this application down, or you could push up, I guess. But you're using the brush to do the pushing. You can also get a steel ribbed roller for fiberglass process use. You can do that. I find the brush just to be a whole lot more, for me, easier. It's a chip brush. It's disposable. I use it once, I throw it away. They're inexpensive, and you can do just about the same. And sometimes, you know, the contour isn't correct. You can't get a roller into this void very well. So you want to use something that, you know, can adapt to the texture and the contour, and that's the brush. Just kind of keep going back, check your work. So I'm going to keep doing this, and then I'll, it looks like I can already see my valley. I'm going to want to put another layer in, and I'll do that. I have a rule for myself that I don't put any more than 3 layers of fiberglass, chop, strand, whatever, at any given time, because it's the epoxy, obviously you can't make it too deep or it won't cure right. Also, a bigger concern is sag. It'll start to drop on you. So I'm going to turn the boat a little bit even more up on end, just so it gets more of a flat surface and the air and everything can go where it's supposed to, which is up. And I'm going to leave this and let it cure for at least 24 hours and then go back and assess how much more. I can tell I still have some areas like right here that need more of the chop strand, but I don't want to put any more on this moment. So I'll let that go. I'll be amazed probably when I come back with my orbital and take off what I have already. And I'll see the valleys pretty quick. And I could even at that point make a decision, but maybe this is a fairing compound correction time versus more of the chop strand, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be more chop strand. So I pushed all the air out. I've made sure that the resin isn't too thick and the cloth is not floating. And I'll kind of keep an eye on it the next 10 minutes to look for, you know, bubbles and things that have popped up, and I'll push those out. And then we'll just let this one rest for now. So it's been a few days, and my epoxy resin and chop strand mat has cured fully. Problem with epoxy is once it's cured, it puts a blush or a film over itself to create an anaerobic environment and then cure to hardness. So in order to allow you to add more glass and resin, you need to use an abraded surface conditioner like a sander to open up or take the blush off. You can also literally wash it with water and soap and water, and that'll take the blush off too. But because I have to sand it anyways, because what I want to do is get rid of some of the hairs, but also to locate the valleys. And when I sand it with the orbital 80 grit, it will hit the high spots and not the low, and creating a valley that I can see. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to apply most likely at least a few spots more glass, chop strand mat, and more resin, so I can get that to where I want. I might find it to be so shallow that I'll just use fairing compound, which would be great, but until I do that, I don't know, so that's my next step. So I've got this abraded with 80 grit, and it's really obvious where my valleys are, right here. I mean, I can feel them, but I can also see them because they're darker. Some of these areas are going to be fine for fairing compound. Some of them I just want to keep building up with glass because it's obviously some structure of the wood is missing, so I need to put it back. So I'm going to want to do some additions. I was really surprised that there's as much in this area. This is where the spray rail was, and it wasn't that obvious. Now it is really obvious that there was a gap there, and I'm going to want to make sure that that's nice and flush for the spray rail when I put it back on. So I'm going to go back and repeat step number 1, where I'm going to, well, I should say, I'm not going to add clear penetrating, or I'm not going to add clear epoxy to the wood because it's already solid. I'm not going to add filler to my epoxy because there's no gap. I am going to do regular epoxy with some more chop strand mat, even smaller sections. I've gone from wide to skinny. Some people will say to go take the smallest shape and build up to the largest. I've heard experts do both, and I don't know if it really matters. Some people swear that if you have a full patch and it pulls off, it pulls everything. Others will say if you use a small patch and then add to it with the wider patches as you get to flush, that it isn't structurally sound because it isn't in a wide spot with a lot of connection. This one is more of a filler. Structurally, I don't know if it's that important other than putting material back that I want on this boat to keep this hole from ever becoming a big issue. So I'm just going to keep adding little smaller and smaller patches until those are full. And then we'll put fairing compound on it. It'll look ugly before we paint it, but it'll be structurally fine. And a lot of boats are ugly if you take the paint off because there's been a lot of scars. I mean, that's the history of the boat revealing itself. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll get back to fairing this surface or putting the spray rails on, whichever I have time for next. That will complete this week's episode. Thank you for tuning in. Please hit the subscribe button if you would like to receive timely notifications of when my next video comes out, which is about every 2 weeks. And if you're enjoying this series, the playlist, please hit the like button. It's always nice to see some positive feedback from what I'm doing. Next episode, I'll go in depth on how I had to fix at least one of the spray rails and how I preserve them decided to go with a exterior fastener approach versus the original interior, and I will show you how I put them back on using 3M's adhesive 5200 to prevent rot in the future, to give it a really strong bond to the hull and the fastener from the outside approach. Take care.